Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Wikipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Wikipedia, and this week I have on the show Dr Christabelle Yeoh. She's an integrative physician and she works in the field of mitochondria, energy, metabolic health, and chronic fatigue. Today we discuss the influence of our mitochondria on energy levels and what the major influences are on the health of our mitochondria. We focus on the impact of longCOVID on mitochondrial health and what can be done to restore health and mitigate the fatigue symptoms that many people experience. And over the course of the pandemic, but obviously post-pandemic, Dr. Yeoh in her clinic spends a large amount of her time helping people overcome long-COVID complications. So we discuss testing that she also recommends people do and what tests can show us about our mitochondrial health. And we go in depth into some of the strategies that she recommends people do. Now, just on the whole fatigue aspect, though we sort of focus on long COVID, prior to COVID, Dr. Yeoh worked a lot with people just on chronic fatigue as a rule. So any sort of fatigue related conditions could be enhanced through some of the strategies that we discussed today on the show. Dr. Christabelle Yeoh has had over 2 decades of experience in clinical care, most of which has investigated the root causes of chronic disease. Dr. Yeoh is passionate about sharing her knowledge on the interconnectedness of human metabolism, biology, and behaviour, and dedicates her practice to working with patients with complex chronic conditions, neuroimmune-mediated or chronic inflammatory illness. And she helps address the chronic conditions that can be related to adverse factors in her patient's lifestyle, nutrition, and environment to help optimise their overall function and well-being. And I have listened to Dr. Yeoh's presentations at several conferences over the last few years, and she is so knowledgeable. Dr. Yeoh graduated from medicine at the University of London in 1999 and obtained her membership with the Royal College of Physicians in the UK. She also has a master's degree in nutrition from King's College in London, and after practicing hospital medicine, she worked as a general physician with an interest in nutritional and environmental medicine. She was a director and past president at the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine and is active on the teaching faculty there. And I have included links to where you can find Dr. Yeoh at her clinic, Next Practice Health, and you can see them in the show notes. Just before we crack on into the interview, a reminder that the best way to support the podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcast listening platform. That increases the visibility of the podcast out there in amongst the literally thousands of other podcasts, so more people get the opportunity to learn from the guests that I have on this show. All right, team, please enjoy the conversation that I have with Dr. Christabelle Yeoh. Christabelle, thank you so much for taking the time with me this afternoon to chat about your work. I really enjoyed your conference presentations at ACNIM, and I've heard you speak before on mitochondrial dysfunction, and I found your talk just like really instructive with regards to long COVID and fatigue, and it's stuff that I am seeing a lot of clients with, and I would love to do a bit of a deeper dive into that and fatigue in general this afternoon. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, Mikki. My pleasure.
Can we first start, Christabelle, because obviously you're a doctor, but the way that you practice medicine, I feel, must be quite different to the usual sort of GP type doctor, if you like. How did you get into the sort of functional medicine and become interested in mitochondrial function?
Well, I've been in practice almost 20 years, so it would be too long a story. But I started my journey. Well, I left hospital medicine when I was a gastroenterology trainee because I figured that I couldn't do very much for my patients in 10 minutes. And that's where I was practicing in the hospitals in London. And I decided to get a nutrition master's degree, clinical nutrition. And then I just worked in private practice, dealing with various chronic fatigue and chronic disease states, largely using nutrition and environmental medicine. So my training is more in actually environmental medicine, where you are instructed much more than you would be in any medical degree on the effects of molecules like toxic molecules, toxins, and so on, and how they impact our biochemistry, detox pathways, immune pathways, cellular health, all that sort of stuff. So that's where I started. And then because my patient cohort was mostly a chronic fatigue cohort, then you just have to learn all the relevant things. So of course mitochondria come in pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And Christabelle, how was it for you when you obviously you go through medical degree and you learn all the things, to then start learning information that was any of it at odds with what you learnt in your medical degree, and or actually was it just entirely different learning for you?
It's just an entirely different learning. Yeah, nothing at odds in what you learn in medical school. I mean, all of that is still relevant, because if you see acute medicine cases, you need to still apply all what you learned, like in pharmacology and so on. But this just goes even further, because you can bring in all the lifestyle and other environmental medicine methods of depuration, depurification, detoxification, and so on. And that just becomes more relevant as you get more into chronic disease, not acute medicine.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously I want to get your insights into the mitochondria, what they do, the dysfunction, etc. But first, just in terms of fatigue in general, fatigue has been very much in my mind over the last few years with regards to long COVID, vaccine injuries and things like that. Yet, of course, for many years, for decades before, there have been people suffering from fatigue. And I remember my uncle, actually, he was in bed for several months. I remember when it's like 40 years ago, with what was just sort of like ME, I think it was called. But no one really, it's not that no one took notice, but it was almost dismissed as something. Do you see any major misconceptions out there about fatigue in general?
There's probably a few ways to see that or answer that question. So let's take it from the perspective of the medical profession and how they see fatigue. So if someone goes to their GP frequently and just says, "Oh, I'm tired all the time. I'm tired. I wake up. I don't have refreshing sleep. I'm tired," then it's because medical diagnostics and basic blood tests don't quickly find you any information once you know they're not iron deficient and they're not anemic and so on. Then the doctor's quite likely and quite quickly ready to think that is, oh, you need a holiday, you're stressed, it's psychological. So I think that would be the biggest misconception on the medical perception of fatigue. And then maybe from the public perspective, or the person experiencing the fatigue, there could be different ways to feel fatigue too. So you would drill down on what kind of tiredness the person has of the brain, of the body, different states of energy through different times of the day and so on. But maybe just generally speaking, a misconception might be that they just might need to exercise more or eat more, perhaps, for more energy, or, tired, so eat again, can't think, so eat again, tired, eat again. So that's probably, as you would see it in your work, the biggest misinterpretation of our body, thinking you're tired and you might just need more food.
Yeah. Yeah, whereas actually with the type of work you do, it's more about the inability to utilize fuel effectively at that mitochondrial level. I mean, it's way more than that, but that's the thing I immediately think about when I'm thinking about mitochondria. So for people who are unfamiliar, can you briefly explain the role of mitochondria in our cells? It feels like a huge topic, and obviously we don't have days to do to do a really massive deep dive. But mitochondria, what are they and what do they do?
So I would say the word on the street is that the mitochondria make you energy, and that's what everyone thinks of or knows if they know that word. So yes, mitochondria make you energy, and then the classic description is the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells. So if you Google it, that's the first thing you see, I think.
I'm sure I've used that.
Yeah. And so in the last 10 years or so, I've been, whenever I speak about mitochondria, I like to remind people, and this perspective is just a repositioning of where the mitochondria sits in our biology, is that the mitochondria is not just there to pump you out energy. That wasn't the mitochondria's first priority. Oh, let's just make John heaps of energy, pump, pump, pump. But that's not what it's primarily doing. The mitochondria actually have much greater relationships and extensive networks into our biology that's much more than we even think about. So in the context of the work I do and where people have got post-infection states of fatigue, what was really exciting to learn when Dr. Robert Yeoh started to write about this, I think 10, 15 years ago, was that the mitochondria first are there to fight viruses and fight infections. So the mitochondria are the first port of call, the first steps in innate immunity. So innate immunity would be the first response of our immune system. The adaptive is the learnt response. So the mitochondria have to face the outside world, the viruses, and eons ago when we first evolved, the main kind of attackers and scary things in the outside world were viruses and pathogens that kind of we're going to steal resources from you or eat you. Today's world is different because the toxins entered the space. So toxins actually then mess around with that process, but the original process of mitochondrial metabolism is first steps in innate immunity, and then the second step is it wants to use oxygen. So it's an aerobic obligate thing, like it has to use oxygen. And then if it looks after that first, and then it will think, okay, I've got all this extra spring in my step, I will generate more ATP. But if that oxygen utility isn't there, it's a bit like if you pull back a spring, or it's a oxygen using capacity. And I show this slide on some of Navio's work where using oxygen is like, how deep is that sink, or how deep is that spring to spring back, or how shallow is it? Like, you can imagine if a spring is very shallow, it doesn't have much power to power. Yeah. So if that using oxygen is really efficient, then you spring well into making energy.
Christabelle, with that in mind, like before we get on to the post-infection or sort of injury sort of side of things with mitochondria, like as we age, in your view, should we expect some sort of mitochondrial dysfunction the older we get because things don't work as well, or our exposure to other things in the environment drain our resources is quite the right term, but impact on that mitochondrial function?
Yeah, absolutely. That the mitochondrial theory of aging is probably the theory of aging that I subscribe to most, because there's various theories of aging, with telomere shortening and various other ideas around aging, free radicals and so on. But the whole mitochondrial theory of aging and senescence is probably what I think is the most amenable theory. And so as we grow older, definitely we age because the mitochondria are subject to wear and tear, which looks like basically oxidative stress, pathogens stealing your resources, toxins using up your fuel. And yes, so as you rightly said, demand and resource. But we're probably aging faster than we should.
Mm-hmm.
And then you use the word mitochondrial dysfunction. So I guess it's just a question of definition, because we all think aging is normal. We can't reverse it. But then when does normal become a disease, and when is dysfunction a disorder, and how much dysfunction are you happy with, and how much, it moves into longevity medicine.
Yeah, for sure. And is that something that you also do a lot of work in?
I can, but most of my patients come much more with difficult chronic diseases. But longevity medicine absolutely, dovetails right into chronic disease, because what I've learned from longevity medicine and regenerative medicine, that's what I think they like to call it more, regenerative medicine. It's the same longevity theories and techniques to try and reverse a chronic arthritis that's really hard to reverse, and you're using regenerative techniques to do them. So the regenerative medicine space, and some don't like it being called anti-aging medicine, but that's how it was called initially, is where things were much more novel, and people were trying things, and it was more cutting edge. And that's how science progresses. It has to be like, it has to be controversial to some initially. It has to be cutting edge. It has to be shocking. It has to be unacceptable to others. Yes. And that's how it progresses gradually. But in the last 20 years that I've been working through this field, that's probably where I've learned the most cutting edge things, is from the regenerative space, because we can take that and apply to chronic disease. But it's those things that help longevity.
Yeah, they're on a scale, right, of optimal health versus not optimal health, I suppose.
Yes.
And I think that raises such a good point about that, when do we view aging as accelerated, and what is an acceptable rate of aging, I suppose? Because if we are in an environment as we are, when it's very foreign to us as humans, if you consider evolution, like the amount of time we've spent in this type of industrial, I don't know, I can't recall actually what age we're supposed to be in now. It's probably not the industrial, it's probably
silicone.
Yeah, oh, there you go. There you go.
The silicone age of AI.
Yeah, there you go. What to your mind, what would be acceptable? I think it's such an interesting question, because I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and someone did a presentation on anti-aging, and there were just all of these factors which were all seemed almost insurmountable to me, that we could actually apply them without several hundreds of thousands of dollars. What do you think, Christabelle? Is that something you think about? I don't suppose it is.
I don't know. I don't think of it exactly as that way, because I just think of it as how we as individuals want to live our individual lives to then progress our micro communities.
Yeah.
And then if people have got greater aspirations than that, great. But it has to start with us and the immediate people around us, and then the community around, and then go ahead and save the world. Yeah. So I just think of is what a person wants. So I see the people who want to get better, and who don't feel well, and who know something is wrong, even if all their blood tests were supposedly normal. And so that's what I would then just call a dysfunction.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. If you feel really good, have really good energy, and everything, and you've got this sort of sense of everything is right with you, then that's great. But if that's not the case, and your energy is poor, and you feel like you should be feeling better and not, then I suppose that's a really good sign that things are amiss.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit then, Christabelle, about fatigue and about some of the signs and symptoms that you see in and around it? And obviously, actually, my first question is long COVID. Are we seeing things different with long COVID than we would with any other infection that you can see? Or is sort of post-infection fatigue actually quite normal, but we've never had a spotlight on it before?
Post-infection fatigue for certain viruses is quite common. Common doesn't necessarily mean normal, because normal has been changing over the years, like how they keep changing our blood test parameters lower and lower or higher and higher because the whole populace is changing.
Yeah.
So common after certain neurotropic viruses is the case.
Yeah.
Like Epstein-Barr virus, herpes simplex virus, and so on, other viruses that gravitate to the nervous system. So that's common, but I won't say is normal, but because I would say it happens because there's some other immune dysregulation that couldn't fix it up fast enough. So then what's unusual with COVID is that it is an extra punch or two. So it is a neurotropic virus. It does gravitate very much to the nervous system. But what is different about it is that, apart from the fact that it's a man-made virus, so who knows whether nature would have eventually come to this kind of virus anyway, I don't know. But that what's extra with this virus is that the spike protein is extravascularly injurious.
Yeah.
So then we're pulling in more mechanisms, which I think we'll come to probably in long COVID, that you don't see as much in a post EBV viral fatigue or post Lyme viral fatigue, because that's another big one, tick-borne illnesses and other infections that can be quite stuck in the system. But COVID, I think, has got an extra punch or two.
Okay. And across the last 3 years, has the level of post-COVID, post-virus fatigue changed with the different variants? Because I know obviously that the symptoms have sort of changed and potentially the severity appears to have changed. Has the long outcome also changed, or has it not really?
From what I'm hearing, I don't think it's changed, but that's not, I don't think, statistically backing me what I'm saying or fully researched, because we're still in the evolution of it. Obviously, what's changed is the acute presentation.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is, irrespective of the acute presentation, the people who are going to get the tail end problem is there because they already have some other vulnerabilities in the system. It's not so much because of how acute they were. So definitely we see people who have COVID that isn't that bad. I mean, it's not fun, like a bad flu or thereabouts, but that the post-COVID fatigue is unexpectedly bad.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned it, and that was going to be my next question. Who in your clinic have you seen as being most vulnerable or most at risk of developing long COVID? Have they been people who have already have this, like an immune sort of challenge or another sort of virus underlying?
Mm-hmm.
Is that who you see?
So we expected to see it worse in those patients, those with the immune challenge underlying issue. And for my patient cohort, that is the post Lyme-like illness, Lyme disease, vector-borne illness type of patients who haven't recovered from that and then got COVID. So they're already not well, and then they got COVID on top. So expectedly, I thought they would be quite bad, and that's what we do see. And then in some, but not all, who have had chronic fatigue syndrome before, because I guess they've got some degree of vulnerability, and the just logic, common sense to that is just how well have they looked after themselves and how ready were they when they got the COVID. So those were expected scenarios. Then the unexpected scenarios that we're seeing would be in the fit exercising group of people, especially youngish people, teenagers, early 20s. And I think that's actually just my particular cohort, because I think if you talk to other ME/CFS doctors, they might see some other people. But certain young people have got significant neuro dysregulation, so self-regulation issues, combined with very poor mitochondrial health, which I think we'll go into in a bit. Like they're just doing everything wrong from the mitochondrial perspective, eating at the wrong time, sleeping at the wrong time, in front of blue light and screens the whole time. So they really have a weakened system there. So those are the surprising ones that I'm seeing. But before, they used to wake up at 4 or 5 to go rowing, 3-4 times a week, and perhaps exercise a lot because they can and they're young and they're fit, but don't feel properly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that just if you're thinking about obviously then the other sort of lifestyle behaviors and stuff, is it like the added stress on their immune system because of all of their training that's then making them more vulnerable in that post-infection state?
Yeah. You might know a group of people called the post training syndrome, or the overtraining syndrome.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a cohort of ME/CFS, but they were athletes and trained a lot and then got hit by something and fell straight into ME/CFS.
Yeah.
So it's a bit reminiscent of that, really.
Yeah. And Christabelle, what about the population of people who, when with COVID, it was looking at the research and hearing sort of colleagues talk about who they saw as being sort of the most severe cases, like people with metabolic syndrome, people with obesity, inflammation. Are these people potentially also at risk of this post-infection, or are you not seeing that? Because I imagine they've already got a level of mitochondrial dysfunction that might be progressively worse than, say, someone else who is fitter and not as much.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that cohort is pretty big and everywhere. It's just that I probably have a bit more of a niche practice with complex chronic fatigue cases. So those don't tend to be classically already diabetic and have bad metabolic syndrome, or a 45-year-old overweight man kind of thing. But I'm sure out there that's exactly who's getting very tired, but maybe they're not getting full-blown ME/CFS.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then before we sort of move on into some of the sort of practical elements of it, you also, I believe you talked about vaccine injury at the ACMIM conference. Yeah. What is the role with the mitochondria in potential vaccine injury? Is it the same as what you've just described?
So I had presented a case. That's where that vaccine injury was. I presented a case study, I think, on the second day of the conference, and it was a teenager who, actually, I can't remember the case now. I presented so many cases, sorry.
I know. No, that's fine. That's fine. Just,
because, we're definitely I am seeing a fair bit of post-vaccine symptoms and injuries, and then sometimes they settle down, and then sometimes they haven't settled, and then the person gets COVID, and then it's just starts all over again. So then you don't know what's vaccine, what's COVID. It's both. What I did present in my talk was the numerous papers of how spike protein continues mitochondrial dysfunction and is behind the myocarditis and is behind the endothelial inflammation, and the spike protein is behind a number of the core pathophysiological mechanisms that keep the disorder going. So
yeah. How long did it take you to sort of figure out the link, you and your colleagues? actually there's something going on here with long COVID and with vaccine injury, which is very similar to what you would have already seen with those sort of chronic complex sort of fatigue cases in your clinic? Like, was it quite obvious early on for you, Christabelle?
We already knew to expect it.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about COVID and COVID vaccines. Already before COVID, there's a significant cohort of people who get injured by vaccines, which would be the type of patients that come to our environmental medicine clinics because of the immune dysregulation that they have that other people don't recognize, but that we do recognize. So a small number of people definitely have problems with, the HPV vaccine or the flu vaccine or different vaccines. So we knew that there would be a group of people that would have a higher chance of problem. And then a group of people that we already treat would be those with mast cell disorder, mast cell activation syndrome. And I can't remember which vaccine it was. Perhaps Pfizer did have it on their documentation right there in the second page or something, that vaccine should be contraindicated in mast cell disorder. So when we saw, it's like, okay, I got a huge population of patients with mast cell disorder. We could be in for trouble.
Yeah. So interesting. So, Christabelle, how does I want to talk through some of the number of the lifestyle factors that do improve mitochondrial dysfunction, of course. How do you diagnose mitochondrial dysfunction? How do you know what you're dealing with? Particularly if, obviously in your clinic, you'll have a range of tests, I imagine, that sort of determine it. But what about for people who don't have access to clinics like yours or something like that? Like, what are some sort of signs and symptoms? They're probably fairly obvious, but it'd be quite good just to sort of run through some of them.
Okay. First, I would just say that mitochondrial dysfunction is probably not just this rare thing over there, and that it is a continuum. So I would go so far as to say that most of us would have a degree of it if you want to consider aging and toxins, and we're all strung out with various other things, and then the mitochondria a bit, under the weather. So just, we would all have a degree of mitochondrial imperfections. And then it's only if you use the word mitochondrial disease, then that's different. That sits in the world of geneticists, pediatricians, metabolic specialists. So we're not talking about that. But if that was the case, that's what doctors and GPs would see, very abnormal blood test markers, usually around lactate dehydrogenase, creatine kinase, liver enzyme markers. There's no one marker that's just, that's mitochondrial. It's just a combination where you can see that aerobic and anaerobic metabolism is slowed down and acidic. You might see high lactic acid. You might see high pyruvate. So things like that, that's what then would make someone suspect that there's a true mitochondrial disease, and then you get sent off to geneticists, and they have all their own special ways of testing. So we're not really talking about that group of people, so we'll leave that on the side. So then for people who are just fatigued and wondering, well, how much mitochondrial dysfunction do I have? Then actually this is very hard to quantify. And I can tell you of very highly specialized labs in other countries and so on that I have used before and I have experimented with, and because I practiced in England and I had access to European tests, or I can send tests overseas here too. It's just that's pretty impractical for most people if the test is going to cost $1,000 a test, let's say. But because I have had years of doing tests like that, testing out various things, going to conferences where people talk about all these things, I can tell you that there are tests out there. But for your average GP in person, just thinking about chronic fatigue and how much mitochondrial dysfunction it is, it probably falls into two camps. One would be just because mitochondria dictate metabolism. One would be, is there a very visible metabolic issue that you can see on blood tests, and any doctor can do this: blood glucose, insulin, HbA1c, leptin, or oral glucose tolerance test with insulins. So that's all doable. And that's the very visible face of mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah, nice.
And then the much less visible, invisible faces of it is kind of all under the tip of the iceberg. So then that's where functional medicine doctors have various other tools that are quite easy to do, but not that cheap. So, for example, a urine organic acid test, which is about $400, $300-$400, that shows quite a number of mitochondrial markers. And that's probably what most naturopaths, nutritionists, functional medicine doctors would do.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm kind of going in reverse order to what you asked me, because now let's come to the symptoms.
Yes, that's fine.
So symptoms, the common symptoms would be brain fog and post-exertional malaise.
So exercising and then feeling exhausted.
Feeling ill.
Yeah. Okay.
Feeling ill from the exertion. And that exertion could be a varying degree of exertions. And that malaise could be a varying degree of malaise. So the technical term is PEM, post-exertional malaise. Sometimes that malaise is such bad vomiting and needing to lie down for like one whole day or 2 days.
Goodness. Yeah.
And then sometimes it's muscle pain and nausea.
Okay. And people who, does the sort of level of malaise relate at all to someone's cardiovascular fitness, or does it seem unrelated to that? Because I actually imagine that someone who is fitter might push themselves harder, which might actually end up with more malaise rather than an unfit person. Is there a relationship there?
So the exertion is a exertion for that person. So if someone is normally runs 2-3 Ks every day, but then they like sprint up the stairs at home and then they realize that, their legs are unusually heavy. So that's not really a terrible malaise, but they know something's up there. It's like, how come that's not right? But maybe someone who doesn't exercise at all, but then they might just struggle to, go out, hang the laundry, walk their dog, and
do normal sort of activities of daily living. Yeah. What about POTS, Christabelle? Is that all part of it as well?
Yeah. So it's a continuum spectrum. So POTS is really bad, post-exertional malaise, but it's where you can actually diagnose a problem with the heart rate when a person is upright. So, because obviously if we feel really sick, tired, vomiting, dizzy, headache, we're going to lie down. But sometimes we really absolutely need to lie down because the body actually can't even tolerate a vertical stance with gravity.
Yeah.
So that's POTS.
Okay. So then, you did such a great job of sort of breaking down some of the steps that you take with your cohort to sort of get them on the path to sort of feeling better. Are we able to run through these and how they help? I know I'm talking about mitochondria because it's sort of at the heart of it, but how they help the long COVID fatigue and stuff that people experience?
Okay, so we'll talk about the mitochondrial support steps.
Yes.
And as you said, long COVID, but this does apply to every someone, even if they don't have long COVID, but let's say they're really tired from the flu last month.
Yeah.
So this would apply equally well. Or someone maybe who's a lot sicker, they've got Parkinson's disease and they have that awful fatigue as Parkinson's patients do. So this applies across the board. So starting with nutrition, I don't know if you heard in my talk, I said, well, because I've been talking about nutrition for, like decades.
Yeah.
I just made it a bit of a joke as to saying, I don't care what you eat, but I care what time you eat it.
Yes.
So I do care what people eat, but I'm really trying to now drive home the emphasis on what time they eat.
Yes. Can we talk about that chrononutrition? Why is that so important?
Yeah. So because the mitochondria are these things inside our cells that actually evolved from nature, and they were these tiny bacteria that got into our cells, or what eventually was going to become a very complex organism, cells. The whole idea is that mitochondria have evolved with nature, and the things that have helped us evolve over nature is all the forces of nature. So that is sunlight and light, and also magnetism, so the magnetic fields from the earth. But I didn't really talk about that so much in the talk. And then also, which I didn't go into as well, the cold. Yeah. So from a food perspective, it is, and the research is coming out in this area, which is awesome, that what time we eat really has a major impact on our oxidative capacity. So our oxidative phosphorylation, the kind of energy processes inside the mitochondrial matrix and membranes, that is affected by what time we eat and how late we sleep and things like that. So if we're eating in the middle of the night, then we're just telling our body that it's daytime, whereas at night we should be recovering and regenerating the system.
And is there because I have done a bit of reading around time restricted eating and intermittent fasting and things like that. So what is your practical sort of recommendation for people with that eating window?
Yeah, it would be to eat when the sun is up and stop when the sun is down. Just that's a really generic rule that's really easy to understand.
Yeah.
But then some people also have to shorten the window even more because of either trying to achieve more fat burning capacity or other reasons. But then I would say then it's better to eat early and finish early. So I prefer that people would eat breakfast at 7, 8, or 9, and then finish eating at 2, 3, or 4. Yeah, because I know it was quite popular in the previous years to go the other way.
16,
start eating at 2 p.m. and then finish dinner, 8 or something. So that it's not that easy to do that for some people's social patterns, but I think that that's the more efficient way for the mitochondria to rest and recover. Because if we want to do a longer intermittent fast for stimulating mitophagy, then it should be to skip dinner and then have a good breakfast.
Yeah, and so mitophagy, so this is the purpose of it, to stimulate that. What is mitophagy?
So mitophagy is, it's a similar word to autophagy, or other people say autophagy. Autophagy is when the cells sort of regenerate themselves, decide which cell needs to go, which cell to keep, eat up, clean up, throw out the rubbish. And just like that's what our body does with cancer cells. It does autophagy and chews up the dead, degenerative and cancer cells, the bad cells. So mitophagy does the same thing, except the mitochondria do that to themselves. Mitochondria decide themselves, because there's several hundred in each cell. Let's say if it's a muscle cell, and then there's more if it's a nerve and less if it's something else. So each mitochondria decide for itself. What state am I in? What's the degree of disrepair here? Do I need to crumble and make myself die and clean up the mess? Or can I keep going, or do I join with other mitochondria? So it's mitochondrial fission and fusion. Shall I go and join my neighbor over there because I'm dying off, and I'll give them the few resources I have left? So the mitochondria decide all that on their own. Somehow it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
And but they do that to recover themselves and to keep the cell healthy.
Yeah.
So it's like they're kind of altruistic. They're like jumping to save the sinking ship. So they go, oh goodness, this cell I'm in, we're not going well. We need to jump off and save our resources. We'll kill ourselves and the others can survive. That's what mitophagy is, and fasting supports that process and is essential for that.
Okay, that's awesome. And then, Christabelle, of course, ketogenic diets are similar sort of health benefits to fasting. Is that something else that you would recommend to a motivated patient?
Ketogenic diet is definitely helpful for a lot of reasons, and if a motivated patient can do it, it's really great. But it's also sometimes quite hard to do if a patient's got quite a heavy infection load. So the difficult patients that we see who struggle with that would have, maybe they still have a lot of active fungal issues, active Borrelia, Lyme, other infections, because the viral load, the infection load, keeps them in anaerobic metabolism, and they feel as if they just need to eat. It's really hard not to eat carbs, and really hard to have all the long gaps as well.
Yeah.
So in the end, even though we like long fasting and ketogenic principles to get the ketones up, to help the brain inflammation, to help the microglial activation, to do all the regenerative things that they do, sometimes it is quite difficult for a patient, and then you just have to do the best you can. And the best you can, therefore, would be eating when the sun is up and having tons of protein and enough good fats, and then do what carbs you need to do, like to get by.
Yeah, okay. And then what about ketones? Have you explored the use of them with any of your patients, Christabelle?
I haven't used like beta hydroxybutyrate supplements as a ketone supplement consistently because of our supply issues here. They kind of go up, on and off in the Australian supply issue in community. So I know in the US you can buy things more consistently, but I haven't done that, especially if you try and stick to TGA approved products.
Yeah, yes.
But what I would use all the time is MCT oil.
Yeah.
Which is pretty helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And what about, and I know like obviously the eating window, the sun up to sundown is important. Vegetables, phytochemicals, like those kind of recommendations. Do you make recommendations around greens powders for people who don't want to eat? Like what are your thoughts around stuff like that?
So if I'm thinking mitochondria, I don't even think any of that.
Oh, amazing.
I must say.
Good to know. Good. Yeah.
I mean, it maybe is a blind spot of mine, because for sure the polyphenols and other plant substances would help the microbiome, and then that helps, that goes back. There's a lot of mitochondrial microbiome crosstalk, so for sure. But that just isn't my big emphasis. And also probably because a lot of my patients already eat quite well.
Yes.
They're already mostly what you would call paleo. They mostly already just do meat and vegetables.
Yeah. So you just get them to double down on that stuff then, and the meat particularly.
Enough protein. Yeah.
And what about supplements, Christabelle? Like, what do you see as important there?
So the key supplements I would focus on would be some of the nutrients for oxidative phosphorylation and the electron transport chain.
Mm-hmm.
So primarily Ubiquinol.
Mm-hmm.
And I do also like B1 benfotiamine. especially the fat-soluble version of B1, and B3.
Yeah.
Niacinamide, but more often I'd use nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide.
Okay, yeah.
And then I would often be using carnitine.
Yeah.
As well.
For that fatty acid transport?
Yeah.
What kind of amounts would you suggest with that?
1 gram of acetyl L-carnitine.
Yeah. Because if I look, like, people often ask me about that, and do you know Dom D'Agostino?
Yes.
Yeah, he said to me on a podcast that he uses 3 to 4 grams a day. And then if someone goes and buys them off the shelf, they often buy the capsules, which has like 150 milli. Yeah, like terribly, like quite small. But obviously your amounts are sort of in the gram realm that Dom talks about too. Yeah.
I usually like a minimum of 1 gram, and sometimes I do 2.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Your Ubiquinol, is that like, you must be familiar with MitoQ? Are you familiar with that? And is that like, because there's a lot of research that they suggest it's the best type of sort of product because of the bioavailability, but that's not...
So MitoQ, like the company that makes Ubiquinol?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that necessarily, but Ubiquinol would be the not ubidocarinone, but an activated form of CoQ10. Okay. So definitely use Ubiquinol. You're not ubidocarinone.
Yeah. It's funny because because when you're so exposed to like one brand and you're like, that's the best, and then so many people are like, so expensive. So it's quite good to hear of other successful practitioners using alternative and very successfully using other options for people who might not be able to do the MitoQ route, I suppose.
I mean, if you look through there's some good papers with showing all the different vitamins that do all these different things for the whole energy pathway. You could end up on a lot of supplements, like glutathione, vitamin C, vitamin E, ALA, NAC, zinc, selenium, molybdenum, magnesium, B1, B2, B6, B12, like all of those. And so I do think, yes, they all play a role, but what I wanted to say about supplements is, first I would come back to the redox state of the mitochondria before pushing the biochemical state. Okay. So don't tend to load people with a lot of supplements, like all those things I just said, but I'll tend to just pick a few, but then really try and get them to push the redox state support. So the redox state support would be hydration, electrolytes, what's your pH, trying to use light and water and magnetism more to balance that redox.
Yeah. Now, when you mention magnetism, are you talking about grounding?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Dr. Mike Twyman, I think his name is?
I don't know that name.
He's interesting. He talks about quantum medicine, and I believe that's what he talks about. But he is very sort of in the circadian sort of biology, grounding.
Totally.
Yeah, space. And he's talked about that before. So is grounding, Christabelle, literally going outside, bare feet, in grass, on sand, that kind of thing?
Almost, because nowadays you have to choose your spot.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can't do it on like the grassy bit in between Westfield and high-rise shopping centers and stuff. But yes, basically all the quantum theories, biophysics is what we're talking about. That's what feeds the redox state of the mitochondria.
Yeah.
And because I've learned a lot over the years and listened a lot to Dr. Jack Kruse, who is a big quantum guy. So that's where I learned this information. So the way you can ground yourself, whether it's in the sea, lakes, rivers, volcanic areas, swim in cenotes, in New Zealand, you would have a lot of volcanic areas.
Yeah. Auckland is like volcanoes. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And where there is an interference of dirty electricity, of man-made grids and wiring, then that's where you get the best kind of grounding. Yeah.
Yeah. And like what kind of time frame are we talking in terms of, how long would you need to do something like that for?
I have not really read that that's very research based as to how long X number of minutes on Y number of days. But in our community who talks about this a lot, everyone will do grounding a little bit every day.
Yeah. Okay.
Just because it's a bit of a reset. We live in such an electrified world.
Yeah.
That if you can just reset every day, that's what helps. But also the other answer to your question does depend on how sick a person is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the sicker the person, and this is what I said in my talks, the sicker the person, the more we need to leverage what nature can do. And so we see those sickest people who leave where they used to live or grew up because there was no light, no grounding, no decent air. It was industrialized. Like, how are they going to get better? They leave it and go and live in somewhere where they can integrate their whole life into nature, watch the sunrise, walk on the beach, have a swim, get in the cold water, or by the mountains, rivers, lakes, wherever it may be.
Yeah, nice.
And then that's where they get well, and you see that all the time.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Like, it feels like common sense to me. Now, this will be probably. I've seen grounding mats. Is that cheating, or is that actually legit?
It's not that it's cheating. It's just where you're plugging it into. Yeah. So if you live in a high-rise building and you plug it into your PowerPoint, and then it's going down, and how is the wiring of that whole building, and how well is it earthed or not earthed?
Yes.
That's the conundrum there when we live in dense areas. But you can work with building biologists to measure these things. So you can measure the dirty electricity environment. And there are all sorts of measures you can try. But if you live in a fairly rural area, it's just your house and a decent garden around, or neighbors are pretty far away, then you can stick a copper wire down or a grounding rod down with your bed sheet or your grounding mat or whatever. That's probably fine.
Yeah. Okay. And you've mentioned cold water a couple of times. And in fact, it's very, I love jumping in the ocean in winter, or cold showers or whatever. What kind of, and is that because of the potential for that mitochondrial biogenesis? Is that what we see there? Yeah.
Absolutely. So mitochondrial biogenesis, when you look in all the usual textbooks and papers on mitochondria, we all know that exercise is the only way to create new mitochondria. So we have to exercise. Okay, let's exercise. But some people can't exercise, and actually now there's more information on cold thermogenesis, CT, that CT is a really efficient way to create new mitochondria. Yeah, and our mitochondria are basically like batteries in the end. And if you are a physicist and know about semiconductor physics and all of that, which is what I've learned through Jack Kruse, then the cold makes the battery basically more efficient. Like your semiconductors will work faster.
Yeah. What kind of recommendations do you make to your patients, Christabelle?
So people have to start where they can, because most people are a little bit don't like the cold, and especially if someone's got dysautonomia and they're quite weak and debilitated, it's not a welcome recommendation. And so it's easier to just do grounding, light, sunlight, things like that first. But you could start with just a face plunge.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So the face plunge is probably more efficient than just trying to do a cold blast shower, because everyone hates that. And then how long are you in there anyway? And it's awful.
Yeah.
But a face plunge is acceptable to most people. And it's even more efficient because of all the neural reflexes in the face. And there's a diving reflex in the face. And a submersion is more impactful than just a shower. Yeah, so if you get a little bucket, just a little thing that you can just stick your head in, your face in.
Yeah.
And then if you need to start to hold your breath longer and longer, you just use a snorkel.
Yes. Yeah.
Then you can start to keep your face in there 30, 60, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But it might just be 10 seconds to start with.
Yeah. So you meet people where they're at with regards to and which you do for everything, like because you have to. Is there a place for sauna, Christabelle?
Just to finish off on the cold, but a good rule of thumb is as people get more used to the cold, for people who like to go in the sea or do an ice tub or have an ice bath at home, then it's 1 minute per degree. So if people have worked to being able to get to 15 degrees, then you stay 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's such a good rule of thumb. Thank you.
It's quite a lot, because if it's 5 degrees, it's 5 minutes. Oh my God, I can't do that. I'm too tropical. I haven't trained myself enough yet to get to that degree. But
you got to harden up, Christabelle.
That's a good rule to follow.
Yeah, that's great. And sauna, is that something which is useful at all, or not really to the same extent?
So sauna, not for the same mitochondrial biogenesis reason.
Yeah.
Sauna for the infrared light. Yes, for the light, as we said earlier.
Yeah.
So that could just be a red light photobiomodulation panel. It doesn't have to be a sauna.
Yeah, okay.
But if it's a red light sauna, and these days they put them all in together, the heat and the near and the far infrared, then great for the mitochondria. But from the heat perspective, that's not so much mitochondrial biogenesis, but it is good for detox.
Yes.
So then reducing the toxic load, of course, is really important eventually for the mitochondria. But where people have got POTS and they're quite weak and they're tachycardic and they have dysautonomia, they don't do heat very well either. They faint, get dizzy. So then we just start with red light panels.
Yeah, that makes sense. Christabelle, what is your sort of, what have you been seeing over the last year or two in terms of success rates with your clientele, with your protocols? Like, is there, because I know I talk to a lot of people who are just appear to have been sick for a long period of time and not necessarily hopeless, but really do feel a little bit of despair that they're never going to get back to how they were. So do you get good success?
So we have a very motivated patient community, and I'm sure that helps a lot, because they're searching for answers. I'm giving them a lot of information, and they're motivated to do these things. Not everyone's going to be motivated to see the sunrise, not eat after dark, go in the cold.
Yes.
It's like, you're asking a lot of your patients, take, 10, 20 supplements, don't eat this, don't eat that. It's not easy. Like, it's a tough journey to take for our patients, but when they take it, they do well. It's just a constant step-by-step progression. They discover something, they put it in place, they learn from it. Like, I haven't talked about blood sugar management, and that's more basic stuff that probably a lot of your listeners will know. But like, I get people to track, and we do continuous glucose monitors, because they have to learn and see for themselves on their body, and then they take all that into account. So when people do all of this, that's definitely really positive steps. And of course, it's not that it's just all that only. There are some patients out there that are really quite sick, and then we do I do refer people into much more alternative and outside the box therapies that are not available in this country, for example. So people go overseas for different treatments, and that's sometimes we have to do that as well. And when we do all of that, it does work.
Yeah, for sure. Do you see, Christabelle, just to finish up, is there, can you see in the future more mainstream type clinics adopting some of the things that you're doing in your clinic, which you've been learning about for years?
Mainstream, When you say mainstream, to me, that's a 7 to 10 minute bulk billing.
Okay.
Public medicine, don't pay anything, doctor. You just can't do any of this. Yeah, that's it. It needs. It's time. It's coaching. It's showing people the relationship of their bodies to their food, to their nature, to the environment, to the light, to everything they do, how they sleep, how they think, everything. So that takes time. So the other thing I didn't say is that the other reason that we are quite successful, I feel, is because we work with coaches and in groups. And so we take time to keep on with this information. I run like free patient webinars every month for my patients. People just log on and they learn a little thing and they just so it's, how do you do that in 10-minute conventional mainstream medicine? You just can't. But lifestyle medicine and other doctors who've got more time in their clinics and more motivation to work with teams, to work with a nutritionist, work with a coach, refer to an exercise physiologist, work with a chiropractor. They're usually much better at these things as well.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the willingness to do that.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Christabelle, do you take patients right now? Is your clinic full? Like what's the
So we take patients all the time. They just go into they just go in kind of set intakes.
Yeah, nice.
So like I'll have an intake of new patients maybe 3 times a year. But we just do it in a group just so then we can deliver all the information and education as a group. But the one-on-one appointments with me are one-on-one. It's just the group goes through together. So yeah.
It's a good, efficient way of sharing the common information, yet also you're able to individualize it with your one-on-ones. Yeah. Amazing. Christabelle, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Where can people sort of find out more about you and some of your information and your resources? I've seen a few YouTube podcasty type things that you've done online.
It's all a bit random what's on the internet and YouTube and podcasts, because I've done various ones all over. And I don't put them in one place. But my clinic website is Next Practice Gen Biome. So that's GENBIOME. And that was like the generation biome and genes and biome, and
it's awesome. It's so good. Well, we'll definitely put links up to where people can find you and a little bit more about your clinic in the show notes. Thank you so much, Christabelle. Really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. It was fun.
Alrighty, so hopefully you got a lot out of that conversation, and if you know of anyone who is experiencing chronic fatigue or long COVID related complications, please do pass on this podcast episode to them, because I think it could be really valuable. Next week on the show, I speak to Dr. Guillaume Millet all around ultra distance running and exercise physiology. Super interesting. So make sure you tune in to that. Until then, though, you can find me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at Mikki Williden. Head to my website, mikiwilliden.com, and catch up with me there. All right, team, you have a great week. See you soon.